On a quiet Friday morning in Kinmen, a small island only a few kilometers from China's southeastern coast, an air raid siren shattered the calm. Government workers quickly switched off lights and crouched beneath tables. Others rushed to underground car parks, while in nearby hospitals, staff treated streams of wounded people covered in blood, but the blood was fake, the injuries staged, and the casualties were volunteer actors. This was not a scene of real conflict, but part of Taiwan's large-scale civil defense and military drills, simulations designed to prepare for the unthinkable, a potential Chinese attack. The exercises, which have grown in scale and realism, reflect a growing urgency on the island of 23 million people. For decades, China has claimed Taiwan as part of its territory, vowing eventual reunification and refusing to rule out the use of force. Under President William Lai, who took office last year, Taiwan has intensified its preparations. His administration has pushed forward sweeping reforms, lengthening conscription, modernizing training, boosting morale, and increasing defense spending by nearly $1/4, amounting to almost $31 billion. The annual Han Kuang War Games, once largely scripted, now feature dynamic urban warfare scenarios, Gray's own conflict simulations, and large-scale mobilization of reservists. Yet, despite the seriousness of the drills, Taiwanese society remains divided over the imminence of an invasion. According to surveys, nearly two-thirds of citizens believe that China is unlikely to attack within the next 5 years, even as U.S. officials warn that Beijing could be militarily capable of launching an invasion by the year 2027. Many Taiwanese still recall decades of Chinese threats without escalation, fostering what analysts call threat fatigue. At the same time, the shock of Russia's invasion of Ukraine has forced others to reconsider long-held assumptions, prompting a rise in public support for bolstering defenses. On Kinmen, skepticism remains strong. Older residents who lived through artillery bombardments in the 1950s now serve Chinese tourists arriving by ferry. To them, war seems both illogical and economically self-defeating for Beijing. Why would they hurt us ordinary folk? One shopkeeper asked, voicing a common sentiment that war would destroy the very prize China claims to seek. Nevertheless, Taiwan's government insists that complacency is dangerous. President Lai has repeatedly framed the island's approach with the maxim, by preparing for war, we are avoiding war. This reflects not only Taiwan's determination to safeguard its sovereignty, but also the influence of international pressure, particularly from Washington, which has urged Taipei to raise defense spending to at least 5% of GDP by the end of this decade. The stakes extend far beyond Taiwan itself. The island is the world's leading producer of advanced semiconductors, making its stability essential to the global economy. Any conflict in the Taiwan Strait would disrupt international trade routes and could draw in major powers, particularly the United States, which is legally bound to support Taiwan's security. Beijing, meanwhile, has increased military flights into Taiwan's air defense identification zone and conducted naval drills encircling the island, signaling both capability and intent. Whether China will invade remains uncertain. But Taiwan's intensified preparations, its society's mixed feelings, and the international community's watchful eye together highlight one reality. The Taiwan Strait is one of the most volatile flashpoints of the 21st century. The drills with fake blood and staged casualties are more than theater. They are rehearsals for a potential crisis that could reshape not only Asia, but the world. Taiwan's defense reforms under President William Lai represent one of the most ambitious overhauls in decades. Recognizing the island's vulnerabilities, limited manpower, outdated training practices, and low morale, the government has moved to transform both the armed forces and civilian readiness. Mandatory conscription has been extended from 4 months to 1 full year, with increased pay and benefits to attract recruits. This shift addresses long-standing criticisms of strawberry soldiers, a term mocking young conscripts for their perceived fragility. The annual Han Kuang exercises have become Taiwan's signature show of readiness. Once criticized as rigid and unrealistic, they now emphasize practical scenarios, defending metro stations, repelling amphibious landings, repairing tanks in improvised facilities, and rehearsing missile deployment in urban areas. This year's drills involved more than 22,000 reservists, nearly half again as many as last year, signaling Taiwan's attempt to expand its defensive depth. Equally important are the civil defense drills, like the Urban Resilience Exercise. These mobilize entire cities, pausing businesses, emptying train stations, and transforming car parks into triage centers. Hospitals rehearse casualty treatment, firefighters practice urban rescues, and volunteers play the role of victims. While some dismiss such measures as disruptive or alarmist, officials argue that civil preparedness is essential in modern warfare, where missile strikes and disinformation can paralyze societies as much as military attacks. Beyond training, Taiwan is investing heavily in hardware. The defense budget is set to rise by nearly 1/4, exceeding 3% of GDP, with pledges to reach 5% by 2030. Purchases include advanced fighter jets, long-range missiles, and anti-ship weaponry designed to deter China's much larger military. Importantly, Taiwan is shifting from symbolic big-ticket purchases to asymmetric capabilities, systems like mobile launchers and drones that exploit China's weaknesses in urban and coastal invasions. The reforms are not without controversy. Critics warn that increased militarization risks provoking Beijing. Others argue that money should be channeled into diplomacy and technology, not weapons. Still, Taiwan's government insists that credible deterrence is the best guarantee of peace. The phrase "prepare for war to avoid war" encapsulates this strategy, making the costs of invasion so high that Beijing hesitates to act. In this sense, Taiwan's military and civil defense reforms are less about fighting a war and more about preventing one. Public opinion in Taiwan remains one of the most complex factors shaping the island's defense posture. Despite government efforts to highlight the threat from Beijing, the majority of Taiwanese still view the likelihood of an imminent invasion as low. Surveys by the Institute for National Defense and Strategic Research suggest that nearly 2/3 of citizens believe China will not attack within the next 5 years. This sense of reassurance is partly rooted in history. For decades, Taiwan has lived under constant verbal and military threats from China without any actual invasion, creating what analysts describe as threat fatigue. Over time, constant warnings lose their urgency, leading many people to carry on with their daily lives. Yet the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 delivered a psychological shock, reminding Taiwanese that democracies can be invaded when they least expect it. Since then, civil defense drills have taken on new meaning for some citizens, particularly younger professionals who had previously dismissed them as unnecessary. Nevertheless, there remains a deep divide between those who embrace preparedness and those who see it as futile or provocative. Many older citizens in Kinmen, who endured shelling during the Taiwan Strait crises of the 1950s, argue that war is unlikely because economic ties between China and Taiwan have deepened. Shopkeepers who now welcome Chinese tourists see Beijing as too pragmatic to destroy a place it profits from. On the other hand, younger generations, especially in Taipei, increasingly view China as a threat to democracy and personal freedom, not merely a distant political quarrel. This divide reflects broader psychological challenges. How can a society balance vigilance with normalcy? Constant fear risks paralyzing daily life, but complacency risks leaving the island unprepared for a crisis. The government faces the difficult task of convincing its people to take the threat seriously without creating panic. President William Lai's phrase, "prepare for war to avoid war," seeks to strike that balance, yet critics argue that his rhetoric may itself heighten tensions and provoke China further. Others worry that heavy emphasis on military readiness diverts attention from diplomacy or social resilience. Ultimately, Taiwan's psychological readiness may prove as decisive as its weapons. In a crisis, the willingness of ordinary citizens to follow evacuation orders, resist disinformation, and maintain morale could determine whether Taiwan survives as a functioning democracy or succumbs to chaos. China's calculations toward Taiwan are shaped by a mix of historical claims, political legitimacy, and strategic ambitions. Beijing insists that Taiwan is an inseparable part of China, portraying reunification as a matter of national destiny tied to the Communist Party's credibility. President Xi Jinping has repeatedly stressed that the Taiwan question cannot be passed down indefinitely, suggesting an urgency that makes the status quo increasingly fragile. At the same time, China's leadership must weigh the risks of military action. A full-scale invasion would be enormously costly in lives, resources, and international reputation. Analysts note that a failed invasion could even destabilize the Communist Party itself, making caution the more pragmatic option. Instead of outright war, China has employed a strategy of gradual pressure. Frequent incursions of warplanes into Taiwan's air defense identification zone, naval drills encircling the island, and cyber attacks serve as daily reminders of Beijing's power. These actions aim to exhaust Taiwan militarily and psychologically while avoiding outright conflict. Beyond military pressure, a decision to never give up no matter how heavy the burden gets, spreading disinformation, funding sympathetic politicians, and cultivating cultural and economic ties in hopes of winning Taiwanese hearts and minds. A Swedish study found Taiwan to be the world's most targeted country for foreign disinformation operations, most of it traced back to China. This suggests Beijing is as focused on psychological warfare as it is on missiles and tanks. Internationally, China's approach is complicated by its global ambitions. Beijing seeks to project itself as a responsible rising power while avoiding direct confrontation with the United States. An invasion of Taiwan could trigger devastating sanctions, disrupt trade, and fracture relations with Europe and Asia, outcomes that would undercut China's economic growth. At the same time, Chinese leaders may calculate that delaying too long risks Taiwan drifting permanently out of their orbit, especially as younger generations identify increasingly as Taiwanese rather than Chinese. Thus, Beijing balances between coercion and patience, signaling its readiness for force while investing heavily in economic and diplomatic alternatives. For Taiwan, this ambiguity poses a constant challenge. Is China's build-up preparation for war or a sophisticated bluff to pressure Taipei into concessions? Many experts believe the answer lies somewhere in between. Beijing may not be ready for a large-scale invasion in the short term, but its strategy of incremental escalation ensures that Taiwan remains under unrelenting pressure. This uncertainty itself is a weapon, keeping Taiwan and the world perpetually on edge. The role of the United States and the wider international community is central to Taiwan's security equation. For decades, Washington has maintained a policy of strategic ambiguity, deliberately leaving unclear whether it would directly intervene in the event of a Chinese invasion. The Taiwan Relations Act of 1979 commits the U.S. to provide Taiwan with defensive weapons and to help maintain its security, but it does not explicitly guarantee military intervention. This ambiguity is designed to deter both sides, discouraging Beijing from launching an attack while preventing Taipei from declaring formal independence. Yet, in recent years, successive American administrations have edged toward a more assertive stance, with senior officials warning that the threat from China is imminent. and pledging stronger military cooperation. U.S. arms sales have already transformed Taiwan's arsenal. Washington has approved billions of dollars in weapon packages, including anti-ship missiles, advanced fighter jets, and air defense systems. The Pentagon has also emphasized asymmetric warfare, urging Taiwan to invest in mobile launchers, drones, and coastal defense systems that could frustrate a larger Chinese invasion force. Joint training programs, though often discreet, have increased. At the same time, U.S. warships regularly transit the Taiwan Strait, a symbolic demonstration that the waterway remains open and contested. These moves both reassure Taiwan and provoke Beijing, which accuses Washington of undermining peace and encouraging separatism. Beyond America, Taiwan's security is tied to global interests. The island is the world's leading producer of advanced semiconductors, supplying chips essential to everything from smartphones to fighter jets. A conflict that disrupted this supply chain would cripple global industries and economies, creating a powerful incentive for countries like Japan, South Korea, and members of the European Union to support Taiwan indirectly. Japan, in particular, has grown more vocal, with its leaders warning that a Chinese attack on Taiwan would pose an existential threat to Japan's own security. Australia has echoed similar concerns, aligning with the United States through the AUKUS Security Pact. Nevertheless, uncertainty lingers. Would America truly commit its military to defend Taiwan, risking a war with nuclear-armed China? Would European allies impose sanctions as severe as those on Russia after its invasion of Ukraine, or would the world hesitate, unwilling to sacrifice economic ties with Beijing? These unanswered questions weigh heavily on Taiwanese society. On one hand, the belief that the international community would rally to its defense provides reassurance. On the other, skeptics warn that relying too much on external powers could foster dangerous complacency. Ultimately, the United States and its allies act as both shield and catalyst. Their presence deters China, but their involvement also intensifies Beijing's sense of encirclement and urgency. For Taiwan, this paradox is inescapable. Its survival may hinge not only on its own readiness, but on whether Washington and the broader international order are truly prepared to defend one of the world's most critical flashpoints.